"The inheritance is mine now," Diana declared, swirling her champagne as our family gathered on the beach house veranda. "Dad promised everything to me before he died." I maintained my composure, despite the shock rippling through me. What my sister didn't know was that I had recorded our father's true intentions just weeks before his passing, evidence that would shatter her elaborate lie and everything she thought she had secured. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sunset painted the ocean in brilliant oranges and purples as our family gathered for what was supposed to be a healing vacation. 6 months after our father's death, we had come together at his beloved beach house in Newport, the same place where he had proposed to our mother 48 years earlier, the same shore where we had collected seashells as children, and now the setting for what my sister believed would be her triumphant moment. Diana had always possessed a flair for dramatic timing. As we sat around the expansive veranda table, crystal glasses reflecting the fading light, she waited for the perfect moment, when everyone had just enough champagne to soften their reactions, but not enough to blur the significance of her announcement. "I have something important to share," she said, her voice carrying that practiced blend of solemnity and authority she had perfected in her corporate career. "Something Dad entrusted to me before he passed." The table fell silent. My mother, still draped in the quiet grief that had become her constant companion, looked up with sudden interest. My Aunt Patricia, Dad's only sister and fierce protector of his legacy, narrowed her eyes slightly. My husband Thomas squeezed my hand beneath the table, sensing tension before it had even materialized. "As you know," Diana continued, setting down her glass with deliberate precision, "the formal reading of Dad's will is scheduled for next week with Mr. Abernathy, but Dad wanted me to prepare you all for what's coming." She reached into her designer handbag, the same one I had noticed her purchasing the day after Dad's funeral, and removed a folded document. 2 months before he died, Dad made significant changes to his estate planning. He decided that the family business should have unified leadership moving forward. She paused, making eye contact with each person at the table before landing on me. "He appointed me as the sole inheritor of Westridge Properties. The inheritance is mine now. Dad promised everything to me before he died." The beach house veranda, usually alive with the rhythmic sounds of waves, fell into a silence so complete I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. 26 years of my life dedicated to Westridge Properties, the company our grandfather had founded and our father had expanded, dismissed in a single sentence. "That can't be right," my mother said, her voice soft but steady. "James always intended to divide the company between both of you girls. He told me so repeatedly." Diana smiled with practiced patience. "People change their minds, Mom, especially when they realize that divided leadership leads to divided vision." Dad and I had many conversations about this in his final months. He came to understand that Westridge needed a clear succession plan, not a complicated power-sharing arrangement. I studied my sister's face, the absolute certainty in her expression, the triumph poorly disguised as solemn responsibility. At 42, Diana had mastered the art of rewriting reality to suit her narrative. She had been doing it since childhood. From convincing our parents that it was I who had broken the antique vase, it was her, to taking credit for business strategies at Westridge that I had developed. "This is the first I'm hearing of any change," I said finally, working to keep my voice level. At 39, I had learned that displaying emotion around Diana only gave her additional material to use against me. Dad and I spoke nearly every day about business matters, right up until the end. He never mentioned any intention to change his succession plans. Diana's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's because he didn't want to hurt you, Emma. He knew how attached you were to the idea of co-running Westridge. He found it easier to avoid the conversation." So instead, he secretly changed his entire estate plan without mentioning it to anyone except you? Aunt Patricia interjected, her tone making clear her skepticism. At 73, she had seen enough of life to recognize manipulation when it presented itself. Not secretly, Diana corrected smoothly. Privately. There's a difference, and I have the documentation to prove it. She tapped the folded paper before her. This is a copy of the amendment to his trust. You'll all receive official copies from Mr. Abernathy next week, but Dad wanted me to prepare the family personally. My cousin Michael, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. May I see that document? As a corporate attorney, Michael had always been the family's legal compass. Diana hesitated briefly before sliding the paper toward him with confident nonchalance. Michael adjusted his glasses and reviewed the document, his expression giving nothing away. After a moment, he looked up. This appears to be a standard amendment form, signed by Uncle James. It does indeed redirect all shares of Westridge Properties to Diana exclusively. He paused, then added, though it's unusual that Harrison Abernathy didn't mention this significant change when we initially discussed the estate after Uncle James passed. Mr. Abernathy follows his client's instructions, Diana replied. Dad specifically asked him not to disclose this change until the formal reading. He wanted me to prepare the family first, in a private setting. I felt a peculiar calm descend over me as I processed what was happening. The sensation wasn't shock or even anger, but recognition. The clarity of finally seeing a pattern that had been forming my entire life come into perfect focus. When exactly was this amendment executed? I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. March 17th, Diana replied promptly, about 2 months before he died. The date struck me immediately, March 17th. I remembered that day clearly, not because of any legal documents or dramatic changes to our father's estate plan, but because it was the day Dad had begun his 3rd round of chemotherapy. I had driven him to the hospital myself, sat beside him during the 6-hour treatment, and brought him home afterward. He had been weak, nauseated, and certainly in no condition to make major legal decisions. More importantly, March 17th was exactly 3 days after I had visited Dad at his home and recorded our conversation about his wishes for Westridge, a conversation in which he had explicitly confirmed his intention to leave the company to both of us equally, with me taking operational control and Diana handling the public-facing responsibilities. I had recorded that conversation not out of suspicion regarding Diana, but because Dad had asked me to. Memory gets fuzzy around these things after someone's gone, he had said. When the time comes, I want there to be no question about what I intended. As this realization settled within me, I noticed Thomas watching me closely. He alone knew about the recording, having been present when Dad had requested it. Our eyes met briefly across the table, a silent communication passing between us. Not yet, his slight headshake suggested. Wait for the right moment. Well, my mother said, breaking the tense silence, I suppose we'll learn all the details at the official reading next week. For now, let's try to enjoy our family time together. It's what James would have wanted. Diana raised her glass, the very picture of gracious victory. To Dad, she offered, and to family. The others reluctantly raised their glasses, the toast hollow against the weight of her announcement. I joined them, touching my glass to my lips without drinking. My mind was already racing ahead, calculating, planning. As the evening progressed, I maintained my composure while Diana held court, subtly beginning to position herself as the new family patriarch, suggesting changes to the beach house, mentioning difficult business decisions that would need to be made at Westridge, even offhandedly noting that she might finally sell the lake cabin that Dad sentimentally held onto, but that no one really uses anymore. The lake cabin, my sanctuary. the place where I had spent weekends working alongside Dad, learning the business from the ground up while Diana had been building her social connections in the city. The property he had promised would always remain in the family as a place for future generations to connect with nature as he had. I excused myself shortly after dinner, needing space to think. The beach had always been my refuge, the rhythmic crash of waves against shore, providing clarity when my thoughts became turbulent. I walked barefoot along the wet sand, the cool May evening wrapping around me as I pieced together my understanding of what had just happened. Diana's announcement wasn't impulsive. It was calculated, deliberately staged during our family vacation when emotions would be running high around Dad's memory, when the setting itself would make confrontation seem inappropriate and disrespectful to his legacy. She had chosen this moment precisely because she believed it would make challenging her claims seem petty and divisive. More concerning than the announcement itself was the document Michael had examined. If it contained Dad's authentic signature, how had Diana managed to obtain it? Given his physical condition on March 17th, the possibility of coercion during a vulnerable moment seemed increasingly likely. As I walked, I mentally inventoried the evidence I possessed: the video recording of Dad clearly stating his wishes, the inconsistency with the date of the alleged amendment, the suspicious timing of Diana's announcement before the official reading of the will. It was substantial, but would it be enough against a legally executed document bearing Dad's signature? The sound of footsteps on sand interrupted my thoughts. Thomas was approaching, his tall frame silhouetted against the moonlit shore. "Hey," he said simply, falling into step beside me. After 15 years of marriage, he knew when I needed space to process and when I needed a sounding board. "She's lying," I said without preamble. "That amendment, if it's even real, couldn't have been executed with Dad's full awareness, not on that date." Thomas nodded. "The chemo day." "Exactly. He could barely sign his name on the hospital forms. He certainly wasn't in any condition to make major decisions about his estate." I stopped walking, turning to face the ocean. "She's taking advantage of his most vulnerable moment to rewrite his legacy." "What are you thinking?" Thomas asked, knowing me well enough to recognize the determination already forming beneath my shock. "I'm thinking it's time to stop letting Diana rewrite history," I replied, a clarity emerging through my initial disbelief. "She's been doing this our entire lives, taking credit for my work at Westridge, positioning herself as Dad's confidant when she barely spent time with him during his illness, creating narratives that serve her interests regardless of truth." "And the recording?" "Not yet," I said, echoing his earlier silent advice. "Diana needs to believe she's won completely. If I challenge her immediately, she'll have time to create countermeasures, possibly even question the recording's authenticity. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with first." Thomas wrapped an arm around my shoulders as we gazed out at the dark waves. "You realize what this means, right? If she's gone this far, potentially manipulating your father during chemotherapy, forging or coercing documents, lying to the entire family, there's no telling what else she might do to secure Westridge." I nodded, the full implications settling into place. "This isn't just about inheritance anymore. It's about protecting Dad's real legacy from someone willing to corrupt it for personal gain." As we stood there on the shore, the rhythmic waves mirroring the steady resolve building within me, I made my decision. Diana believed she had orchestrated the perfect coup, timed her announcement to maximize emotional impact while minimizing immediate resistance, presented documentation that appeared legitimate on surface examination, and positioned herself as merely the messenger of our father's wishes rather than their manipulator. What she didn't realize was that her carefully constructed narrative was built upon a foundation that could not withstand scrutiny. She had selected the perfect setting for her announcement, but in doing so, had inadvertently chosen the very place where I felt most connected to our father's true intentions. "We should head back," I said finally. "Diana will be wondering where we've gone, and the last thing we want is for her to suspect I'm planning anything." As we walked back toward the beach house, its windows glowing warmly against the night sky, I felt a strange sense of gratitude emerging alongside my determination. Diana's announcement, intended to devastate me, had instead freed me from the pattern of acquiescence that had characterized our relationship for decades. By reaching for everything, she had finally shown her true nature so undeniably that I could no longer make excuses for her behavior. When we rejoined the family gathering, Diana was regaling everyone with stories about her recent business trip to Singapore. Stories that conveniently highlighted her international connections and business acumen, further justifying her claim to Westridge leadership. She paused mid-anecdote as we entered, her eyes quickly assessing my emotional state. "Emma, there you are," she said with practiced warmth. "I was just telling everyone about how we should consider expanding Westridge's portfolio into emerging Asian markets. It's something Dad and I discussed extensively." Another fabrication. Dad had been explicitly cautious about international expansion, preferring to dominate regional markets thoroughly before extending our reach. It was actually my proposal for measured expansion into carefully selected international markets that he had been considering in his final year, a strategy Diana had dismissed as unnecessarily conservative during our last board meeting. "How interesting," I replied, matching her pleasant tone. "Dad always emphasized understanding markets deeply before entering them. I'd love to hear more about these extensive discussions you had." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Diana's face before her confident mask reasserted itself. "Of course, we can discuss the details another time. Business talk isn't appropriate for a family gathering." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Convenient, considering she had spent the last 20 minutes discussing exactly that. The remainder of the evening proceeded with strained cordiality. Diana continued positioning herself as Westridge's visionary future, while I maintained a calm, interested demeanor that revealed nothing of my internal strategic planning. By the time everyone retired for the night, Diana appeared fully convinced that I had accepted her announcement with resigned disappointment rather than determined skepticism. In the privacy of our beach house suite, Thomas and I finally reviewed the recording from March 14th. Dad's voice emerged from my laptop, thin from illness but clear in his intentions. "I've always believed that Westridge should remain under family leadership," he said in the video. "Emma, your operational instincts and financial acumen have built our core strength. Diana's networking abilities and public presence have built our reputation. Together, you balance each other perfectly, which is why my estate plan divides Westridge equally between you, with board positions that reflect your natural strengths." He had gone on to detail specific provisions: Emma as CEO and operational head, Diana as chairperson focused on client relationships and public affairs, specific protections to prevent either of us from forcing the other out, clearly defined succession plans for future generations. "I've discussed all this with Harrison," he continued, referring to Mr. Abernathy, our family attorney for over 30 years. "The documents reflect these exact provisions. If anything changes, it would only be after consulting both of you together." The recording continued for nearly 40 minutes, with Dad detailing his hopes for Westridge's future and the specific roles he envisioned for each family member. There was no ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation, and certainly no indication that he was considering the dramatic change Diana had announced. "This directly contradicts her entire story," Thomas said as the recording ended. 3 days before she claims he changed everything in her favor, he's explicitly confirming equal inheritance and balanced leadership. I nodded, the pieces fitting together with increasing clarity. The question is, did she manipulate him into signing something while he was vulnerable from chemotherapy, or is the document itself fraudulent? Either way, she's attempting to steal half the company from you, Thomas pointed out. And not just any half, the controlling interest, based on what she described. I need to speak with Mr. Abernathy before the official reading, I decided. Not to show him this recording yet, but to gauge what he knows. If Dad truly executed this amendment, Harrison would have been involved. He's been Dad's legal advisor for decades. And if Diana somehow circumvented Harrison to get this document created? Then we have even more evidence of manipulation, I replied. Dad wouldn't have used another attorney for something this significant, not without telling me, and certainly not without explaining why to Harrison directly. As we prepared for bed, one final realization settled into place. A recognition that transformed my shock and anger into something closer to determination and even compassion. You know what's truly sad about all this? I said to Thomas as we turned out the lights. Diana already had guaranteed wealth, position, and purpose through Dad's original plan. She would have been chairperson of a successful company, equal, owner with protections for her interests, and a central figure in the family legacy. But that wasn't enough. She needed to have everything, to diminish my role completely, to rewrite even Dad's final wishes. It's about control, not money, Thomas observed. And maybe about finally winning a competition that only existed in her mind. Exactly, I agreed. Which means this isn't just about protecting my inheritance, it's about protecting Dad's true legacy from someone who would corrupt it for personal validation. As I drifted towards sleep, thoughts of tomorrow's carefully planned conversation with Mr. Abernathy already forming, I realized that Diana's announcement, intended to devastate me, had instead clarified my purpose. In attempting to claim everything, she had finally revealed herself so completely that I could no longer make excuses for her behavior or prioritize family peace over truth. The inheritance itself, the material wealth and corporate position, suddenly seemed secondary to something far more important, ensuring that the values our father had built Westridge upon, integrity, fairness, and genuine family partnership, weren't the first casualties of Diana's revisionist ambitions. Tomorrow would begin the careful, methodical process of uncovering exactly how Diana had created this fabricated version of our father's wishes. The video evidence was powerful, but timing, its revelation would be crucial. For now, Diana believed she had secured her victory during our family vacation. She had no idea that her announcement had actually set in motion the very events that would ultimately expose the truth she had worked so hard to conceal. The morning after Diana's announcement dawned with deceptive tranquility. Sunlight streamed through the beach house windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in golden beams. The ocean stretched beyond, a canvas of impossible blue that seemed to mock the turbulence I felt within. I had slept fitfully, my mind continuously sifting through memories, searching for clues I might have missed about Diana's intentions. I rose early, careful not to wake Thomas, and made my way to the kitchen. The house was still quiet, everyone else apparently taking advantage of vacation to sleep in. I welcomed the solitude as I prepared coffee, using the familiar ritual to gather my thoughts for the day ahead. The sliding glass door opened quietly, and my mother stepped in from the veranda. At 69, Eleanor Westridge still carried herself with the graceful posture that had been her signature throughout my childhood. Grief had etched new lines around her eyes in the months since Dad's passing. But this morning I noticed something else in her expression. A steely determination that reminded me forcefully of my father. "You're up early," she commented, accepting the cup of coffee I offered. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. She nodded, studying me over the rim of her cup. Diana's announcement was rather theatrical, wasn't it? The understatement nearly made me smile despite everything. That's one word for it. Mom set her cup down and looked at me directly. "You don't believe it's true, do you? About James changing his will that way?" It wasn't really a question. In that moment, I realized that while Diana might have fooled, Others with her performance, our mother wasn't among them. No, I said simply. I don't. Mom nodded again, as if I had merely confirmed what she already knew. Your father was many things, stubborn, occasionally old-fashioned, sometimes frustratingly private about his feelings. But he was never cruel, and he would have considered it cruelly unjust to exclude you from the company you helped build. Diana seems to have documentation, I pointed out, still testing the waters. Documents can be manipulated, she replied with surprising sharpness, especially when someone is undergoing intensive medical treatment and may not be fully aware of what they're signing. The directness of her assessment startled me. You think she took advantage of Dad during his treatment? Mom's eyes met. Mine, unwavering. I think your sister has always believed she deserves more than she receives. I think she resented how naturally the business came to you while she had to work harder for your father's professional respect. And I think she saw his illness as an opportunity rather than a tragedy. The bluntness of her assessment left me momentarily speechless. My mother had always been the diplomatic center of our family, carefully mediating between Dad's occasional sternness, Diana's theatrical performances, and my quieter intensity. To hear her speak so candidly about Diana's motivations was unprecedented. Mom, You don't need to say anything, Emma. She reached across the counter and covered my hand with hers. I've watched this dynamic between you girls your entire lives. Diana takes, you accommodate. Diana claims credit, you surrender it for peace. It started with toys when you were children, continued with academic achievements in school, and apparently has culminated with your father's legacy. I swallowed hard, emotions threatening to overwhelm my carefully maintained composure. I have evidence, I said quietly. Dad recorded his real intentions just days before the date on Diana's supposed amendment. If this revelation surprised her, Mom didn't show it. She merely nodded as if another piece of a puzzle had fallen into place. James always was more strategic than people gave him credit for. He must have suspected something like this might happen. I'm meeting with Mr. Abernathy this morning, I told her. Before I reveal the recording, I need to understand exactly what documentation Diana has and how she obtained it. A wise approach, Mom approved. Harrison has been with this family since before you girls were born. If anyone knows what your father truly intended, it's him. She hesitated, then added, Would you like me to join you? The offer touched me deeply. Throughout our lives, Mom had been careful never to appear to take sides between Diana and me. Her willingness to accompany me to this meeting indicated just how seriously she viewed the situation. Thank you, but I think this first conversation should be just me and Mr. Abernathy, I replied. The fewer people who know about the recording at this stage, the better. She accepted this with a nod, then said something that would stay with me throughout the difficult days ahead. Emma, whatever happens with Westridge Properties, remember that your father's true legacy isn't buildings or business contracts. It's the integrity and compassion he tried to instill in both his daughters. Only one of you seems to have embraced that inheritance. Before I could respond, the sound of footsteps on the stairs announced that others were awakening. Mom squeezed my hand once more, then seamlessly shifted back into her role as hospitable matriarch as Aunt Patricia entered the kitchen. An hour later, I was driving along the coastal road toward the small town where Mr. Abernathy maintained his law practice. I had told the family I needed to run errands, a plausible excuse that Diana accepted without question. In her mind, I had already conceded defeat. Harrison Abernathy's office occupied the second floor of a Victorian building that had housed the town's legal practitioners for over a century. The brass plaque beside the door read simply, Abernathy Legal Services, with no flashy claims or specialties advertised. Harrison had never needed to promote his services. His reputation for ethical practice and discreet handling of sensitive matters kept his client list full through word of mouth alone. His secretary, Mrs. Reynolds, had been with him nearly 40 years and regarded the Westridge family with the familiarity of someone who had witnessed our triumphs and challenges across decades. "Emma, dear," she greeted me warmly, "Mr. Abernathy is expecting you. Go right in." Harrison rose from behind his desk as I entered, his tall frame slightly stooped now with age, but his mind as sharp as ever at 78. He had been my father's closest friend since college, the best man at my parents' wedding, and my godfather. If anyone understood my father's true intentions, it was this man. "Emma," he said, coming around to embrace me. "It's good to see you, though I wish it were under happier circumstances." So he already knew why I was here. Interesting. "You've heard about Diana's announcement," I stated, rather than asked as I took the offered seat. Harrison settled back behind his desk, his expression carefully neutral. "She called me last night. Said she had informed the family about the amendment to your father's trust and that you seemed distressed." "Distressed?" I repeated, noting the careful word choice. "Is that how she characterized my reaction to being told I've been disinherited? From the company I've helped build for nearly 15 years? Harrison steepled his fingers, regarding me thoughtfully. "Emma, you know there are professional constraints on what I can discuss regarding your father's estate before the official reading. But since Diana has already breached confidentiality, by sharing details, I'll speak as plainly as I can." He paused, choosing his words with the precision that had made him such an effective attorney. "There was indeed an amendment to your father's trust dated March 17th. It bears what appears to be James's signature and was properly witnessed according to legal requirements." My heart sank, despite my suspicions. So the document was real, not fabricated entirely. "You said what appears to be his signature," I noted carefully. "Are you suggesting it might not be authentic?" Harrison's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "I did not personally witness your father signing this particular document. This is unusual, as I handled all of James's legal affairs for over 40 years and was present for the execution of every other significant document, including the original trust." The implications of this statement hung in the air between us. Without directly accusing Diana of anything improper, Harrison was signaling his own concerns about the amendment's authenticity. "Who brought you this amendment?" I asked. "Diana delivered it to my office on March 30th, approximately 2 weeks after its purported execution. She said your father had it prepared as a surprise and had asked her to deliver it only after it was finalized." "And you accepted this explanation? That my father would suddenly work with another attorney after 40 years of your representation? That he would make such a significant change without discussing it with you?" Harrison's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing a flash of the personal hurt this situation had caused him. "I found it highly irregular, Emma, but the document appeared legally executed, with proper witnesses and notarization. In my professional capacity, I was obligated to accept it into the file pending any evidence of impropriety." "Who were the witnesses?" I asked, my mind working rapidly. "Claudia Winters and Thomas Bennett. According to the notary section, they were present when your father signed." The names meant nothing to me, which was telling in itself. Dad would have asked family friends or trusted business associates to witness something this important, not strangers. And the notary? Rebecca Hoffman, from Capital Notary Services. Another unfamiliar name. "Did you verify the witnesses' identities or the notary's credentials?" Harrison leaned forward slightly. "I made preliminary inquiries. Capital Notary Services exists, and Rebecca Hoffman is registered with them. I haven't yet been able to locate the witnesses, though that's not necessarily unusual." Not unusual, perhaps, but certainly convenient for Diana. "Harrison," I said, using his first name deliberately to shift our conversation from purely professional to personal. "You've known my father since college. You've advised him through every major decision in his adult life. Do you believe he would suddenly, secretly, change his carefully structured succession plan to completely exclude me from the company leadership? Harrison held my gaze for a long moment before responding. Speaking not as your father's attorney, but as his oldest friend, no. I do not believe James would have made such a change, particularly not without discussing it with me first. He paused, then added, especially not on March 17th. What's significant about March 17th specifically? I asked, though I already knew the answer. It was his third chemotherapy session. I visited him that evening at home. He was severely nauseated, barely able to hold a conversation, let alone review complex legal documents. Harrison's professional caution was giving way to personal concern. Emma, he could hardly sign the get-well card we brought him. His hands were shaking so badly from the treatment. Exactly as I had remembered. The confirmation sent equal waves of validation and dread through me. The document was almost certainly either signed under duress when Dad was medically compromised or featured a signature that wasn't authentic. There's something else you should know, I said, making a decision. On March 14th, 3 days before this supposed amendment, Dad recorded a detailed video statement explicitly confirming his intention for Diana and me to share Westridge equally, with specific roles allocated according to our strengths. Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly, the closest he typically came to showing surprise. You have this recording? Yes. Dad specifically asked me to record it because he wanted absolute clarity about his wishes. I paused, watching his reaction carefully. He mentioned that he had discussed these plans with you in detail, and that all necessary documents already reflected these intentions. He had indeed, Harrison confirmed, his voice softer now. We finalized the trust structure in February, once his diagnosis became terminal. Equal shares, with you as CEO handling operations and Diana as chairperson managing public relations and client relationships. He was quite specific about the balance of power and the protections for both of you. The confirmation brought both relief and sadness. Relief that my understanding of Dad's wishes was accurate. Sadness that Diana had gone to such lengths to override them. What happens now? I asked. If I present the video recording at the official reading, challenging the amendment? Harrison considered this thoughtfully. Legally speaking, it creates a significant contest to the amendment's validity. The proximity of the recording to the supposed change, your father's medical condition on the date in question, the uncharacteristic legal approach, all of these factors would support challenging the amendment in court if necessary. And practically speaking? I pressed. Practically speaking, Harrison sighed, showing his age for a moment. It would likely initiate a family legal battle that could take years to resolve, potentially damaging Westridge in the process. Your father would have hated that outcome, regardless of who ultimately prevailed. He was right, of course. Dad had built Westridge not merely as a business, but as a legacy that would unite our family across generations. The prospect of a drawn-out legal fight that would divide us further would have devastated him. Is there another approach? I asked. One that honors Dad's true intentions without destroying what he built? Harrison studied me with newfound respect. Even facing potential disinheritance, I was prioritizing the integrity of the family business over my personal claim, something Diana had conspicuously failed to do. Perhaps, he said slowly, if we approach this strategically rather than adversarially, we might find a resolution that preserves both the business and your father's actual wishes. I'm listening. The official reading is scheduled for next week. Diana believes she has successfully secured total control through this amendment. She doesn't know about the video recording or my personal knowledge of your father's condition on March 17th. Harrison's legal mind was clearly working now, identifying leverage points and potential paths forward. If you were to share the Yao, Video privately with Diana before the reading, showing her that you have clear evidence to challenge the amendment. She might be willing to negotiate rather than risk a public exposure of her actions. I considered this approach. You're suggesting I give her a chance to withdraw her claim gracefully, rather than confront her at the official reading. Exactly. It provides her an opportunity to save face while still ensuring your father's true wishes are honored. Harrison paused, then added with unusual candor. It also gives her a chance to choose a better path than the one she's currently on. His words reminded me of something Dad used to say. The true measure of leadership isn't how you wield power, but how you resolve conflicts. He had always taught us that finding solutions that allowed everyone to maintain dignity was more valuable than merely winning at all costs. I'll consider it, I said, rising to leave. Thank you, Harrison, for everything. He walked me to the door, then said something that caught me by surprise. Your father once told me that while Diana reminded him of himself in ambition and outward confidence, you reminded him of himself in values and judgment. He said that was why he never worried about your future, even when circumstances became challenging. The comment lodged in my heart, a validation I hadn't realized I still needed. As I drove back toward the beach house, my mind worked through the implications of our conversation. The amendment existed, but under highly suspicious circumstances. I had clear evidence contradicting its legitimacy. The question now was how best to use that evidence, not just to secure my position, but to protect Westridge itself from the kind of leadership that would begin with deception. Diana's car was gone when I returned to the beach house, giving me welcome space to process my conversation with Harrison. My mother was sitting on the veranda, seemingly absorbed in a book but likely waiting for my return. How did it go? She asked as I joined her. The amendment exists, I confirmed, but the circumstances are extremely suspicious. It was supposedly signed on Dad's worst chemo day, with witnesses no one knows, and Harrison wasn't present for the signing. The first major legal document in 40 years that Dad apparently handled without him. Mom nodded, unsurprised. So, Diana either took advantage of your father when he was medically compromised, or something even more disturbing occurred. The clinical precision of her assessment was jarring, coming from the woman who had spent decades making excuses for Diana's smaller manipulations. You don't seem shocked by any of this, I observed. She set her book aside, gazing out at the ocean for a long moment before responding. Emma, I've spent much of my life trying to maintain family harmony, sometimes at the expense of addressing uncomfortable truths. But your father's illness changed my perspective. She turned to me, her eyes clear and direct. I watched you rearrange your entire life to be present for his treatments, to manage the business while he couldn't, to ensure his legacy would continue exactly as he built it. And I watched Diana make appearances when it was convenient, take credit for arrangements you had made, and position herself as the devoted daughter to anyone who would listen. The frankness of her assessment left me momentarily speechless. I love both my daughters, she continued, but love doesn't require blindness to character. What Diana is attempting now is merely the culmination of a pattern I should have addressed long ago. What would Dad want me to do? I asked, voicing the question that had been haunting me since Diana's announcement. Mom considered this thoughtfully. James believed in fairness above all else, but he also understood that true resolution isn't about punishment, it's about restoration. He would want you to stand firmly for what's right while creating an opportunity for Diana to make better choices. Her words echoed Harrison's suggestion so closely that I felt a renewed sense of clarity about my path forward. Before confronting Diana publicly at the will reading, I would give her one opportunity to withdraw her fraudulent claim and return to the equal partnership Dad had actually intended. Where is Diana now? I asked. She mentioned something about meeting potential investors in town, Mom replied. She's been quite busy making plans for her company. The possessive language highlighted just how completely Diana believed she had secured her victory. She was already acting as the sole owner of Westridge, making plans and connections based on authority she had acquired through manipulation rather than legitimate succession. "She'll be back for dinner?" Mom nodded. "Family dinner at 7. She was quite insistent that everyone be present. I believe she plans to share more of her vision for Westridge's future." The thought of sitting through another performance where Diana outlined plans for the company she thought she had successfully stolen was almost unbearable. But it also presented a strategic opportunity. With the entire family gathered, I could observe how far Diana was willing to take her deception. "I'll be there," I promised, rising to leave. "Emma," Mom called as I reached the door. "Remember that whatever happens with the company, your father's true legacy lives in the values he instilled, not the assets he accumulated." It was almost word for word what she had said that morning, but the repetition only emphasized its importance. Whatever approach I took with Diana needed to honor not just Dad's business intentions, but the integrity with which he had built Westridge from the ground up. As I climbed the stairs to the suite Thomas and I were sharing, I felt a strange sense of calm replacing the shock and anger that had dominated since Diana's announcement. The path forward wasn't yet entirely clear, but the foundation was solidifying. A commitment to truth without destruction, to justice without vengeance, to protecting a legacy without destroying a sister. The inheritance Diana thought she had secured through deception was actually far less valuable than the one I had received through observation and apprenticeship. Not just shares in a company, but the principles that had made that company worth fighting for in the first place. Family dinner at the beach house had always been something of a performance art. My mother, despite her usual preference for simplicity, maintained certain traditions that harked back to her own upbringing in a family where dinner was a formal affair. The large dining table was set with the heirloom china. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier overhead, and silver candelabras framed the centerpiece of fresh flowers she had arranged that afternoon. In our childhood, these dinners had been occasions for learning proper etiquette, for practicing the social graces that Dad insisted would serve us well, regardless of our eventual careers. "People do business with people they trust," he would say, "and trust is built on 1,000 small consistencies." Those lessons had served me well in Westridge's boardrooms and client meetings over the years, but tonight they would serve a different purpose, helping me maintain composure through what promised to be a challenging evening. Diana arrived precisely at 6:45, just early enough to position herself as the evening's unofficial hostess despite being a guest in our mother's home. She moved around the dining room, making minor adjustments to the place settings, refolding a napkin here, straightening a fork there. It was a subtle power move, a physical manifestation of how she intended to rearrange Westridge according to her preferences. "Emma," she acknowledged as I entered, her tone suggesting mild surprise that I had recovered from yesterday's announcement enough to make an appearance. "I was just telling Mom we should use the Waterford crystal tonight. It feels like a celebration, doesn't it?" The calculated casualness of her cruelty was breathtaking. Having announced her supposed inheritance of everything our father had built, she now wanted to toast her victory with his favorite crystal. "Whatever you think best, Diana," I replied evenly, meeting her gaze with practiced neutrality, though I've always preferred the simplicity of the everyday glassware, less pretentious. A small crease appeared between her eyebrows, the first hint that my calm was not what she had expected or hoped for. She had anticipated either continued distress or obvious anger, both reactions that would position me as emotional and therefore less credible. My composure was clearly unsettling. "Well, this isn't exactly an everyday occasion," she countered, recovering quickly. "Besides, Dad always said we should use the good crystal. Why save it for someday when today is what we have?" The irony of her invoking Dad's philosophy while systematically undermining his actual wishes wasn't lost on me, but I simply nodded and moved to help Mom bring serving dishes to the table. Diana's performance was just beginning, and premature confrontation would only allow her to adapt her strategy. By 7, the entire family had gathered. Thomas sat beside me, his quiet presence a reassuring anchor. Aunt Patricia had positioned herself directly across from Diana, her shrewd eyes, missing nothing. My cousin Michael and his wife Rachel completed the circle, along with Mom at the head of the table where Dad would have sat. "Before we begin," Diana announced as everyone settled, raising her glass, "I'd like to propose a toast to Dad. His vision for Westridge Properties will continue to guide us all." It was masterfully done, claiming ownership of his vision while presenting herself as merely its faithful steward. The others raised their glasses somewhat awkwardly, the discomfort of yesterday's announcement still lingering in the air. "To James?" Mom said simply, redirecting the toast to the man rather than Diana's interpretation of his wishes. Dinner proceeded with superficial pleasantness, the conversation carefully navigating around the elephant in the room until the main course was cleared. Then, with the practiced timing of a corporate presentation, Diana set her napkin aside and straightened almost imperceptibly. "I've been giving considerable thought to Westridge's future direction," she began, her voice taking on the polished quality she reserved for board meetings and press interviews. "Dad and I had many conversations about his vision for the company's next chapter, and I feel a profound responsibility to honor those discussions." The presumption was staggering. In a single sentence, she had positioned herself as Dad's chosen confidant, the keeper of his business vision and the rightful steward of his legacy. It was a narrative constructed entirely on a foundation of deception, yet delivered with such conviction that anyone without direct knowledge might easily believe it. "In particular," she continued, warming to her theme, "I'll be focusing on 3 key initiatives he was passionate about: expanding our commercial development division into emerging markets, streamlining our residential property management through increased automation, and establishing the Westridge Foundation to support community development in areas where we maintain properties." These were not, in fact, initiatives Dad had championed. The first had been my proposal for selective expansion, which Diana had previously criticized as too cautious. The second was directly contrary to Dad's people-first management philosophy. And while he had always been philanthropic, he had specifically opposed creating a separate foundation, preferring to integrate community support directly into Westridge's operational budget to ensure it remained a core business function rather than a separate charitable endeavor. Diana was not just claiming his assets, she was rewriting his business philosophy to align with her own priorities. "That sounds quite different from the approach Dad outlined in our strategy meetings last winter," I remarked mildly, taking a sip of water. "Particularly the automation aspect. He always emphasized that personal management built stronger tenant relationships and reduced turnover." Diana's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened slightly. "Strategy evolves, Emma. Dad came to see the efficiency benefits of modern property management approaches. We discussed it extensively during his treatment." The implication was clear. She was claiming private conversations during Dad's illness that contradicted his previously established business philosophy. It was a particularly insidious form of manipulation because it weaponized his death. No one could definitively disprove conversations that supposedly occurred when he was too ill for regular business meetings. Except, of course, for the video recording I possessed. "How interesting," I replied, my tone mild but my gaze steady. "Especially since in mid-March, just before his 3rd chemotherapy session, he specifically reaffirmed his commitment to relationship-based management over automation alternatives." I remember the conversation quite clearly. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Diana's expression. "Well, people often reconsider their positions during difficult times. His perspectives evolved as his condition progressed." "Perhaps," I conceded, though his core business philosophy remained remarkably consistent throughout his career. It's what built Westridge's reputation for exceptional client satisfaction. The subtle challenge hung in the air between us. I wasn't directly contradicting her claims, not yet. but I was establishing clear markers that her narrative diverged significantly from Dad's established business approach. "I appreciate your perspective, Emma," Diana replied with practiced diplomacy. "And I hope you'll consider offering consulting insights as we implement these new directions. Your operational experience would be valuable during the transition." The condescension was exquisite, positioning me as a potential consultant to the company I had helped build for 15 years, offering me crumbs from the table she believed she had claimed as exclusively hers. "That's generous," I replied, the faintest edge of irony in my tone. "I'll certainly give it appropriate consideration after the official reading next week." Diana's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Though, as I mentioned yesterday, the amendment is quite clear about leadership transition. I wouldn't want you to have unrealistic expectations about the reading." "I never have unrealistic expectations, Diana," I said evenly. "I simply believe in allowing proper legal processes to unfold completely before making definitive plans." The tension at the table was palpable now. Mom intervened smoothly, suggesting we move to the veranda for dessert and coffee. As the others rose, Diana lingered, touching my arm lightly to hold me back. "Emma," she said quietly, her voice taking on what she clearly intended as sisterly concern. "I know this transition must be difficult for you. You've devoted considerable time to Westridge, and it's natural to feel displaced. But fighting, this will only make things harder for everyone, especially Mom. Dad made his decision. The sooner you accept that, the sooner we can all move forward." The breathtaking confidence with which she delivered this entirely fabricated version of reality almost made me doubt my own understanding. Almost. This was Diana's most practiced skill, presenting alternative narratives with such conviction that others began questioning their own direct experiences. "I appreciate your concern," I replied, meeting her gaze directly. "But I've never been one to make decisions based on incomplete information. The official reading will provide the clarity we all need." A flash of something, irritation, concern, crossed her features before her pleasant mask returned. "As you wish. I just hate to see you building up false hope. The documentation is quite definitive." "Documentation is only as legitimate as the circumstances of its creation," I responded, the first direct challenge I had offered to her narrative. "Wouldn't you agree?" She stiffened slightly, studying my expression with new wariness. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything, Diana. I'm simply suggesting that next week's reading will be illuminating for everyone involved." I smiled with genuine calm, secure in the knowledge I now possessed. "Shall we join the others? I believe Mom mentioned her blueberry tart for dessert." I moved toward the veranda, leaving Diana momentarily frozen in place. For the first time, since her announcement, the power dynamic had shifted subtly. She had expected continued distress or ineffectual anger from me. My composed confidence had introduced an element of uncertainty into her carefully constructed plan. On the veranda, the conversation had mercifully shifted to reminiscences about past family vacations at the beach house. I settled beside Thomas, who gave my hand a supportive squeeze under the table. Mom served her famous blueberry tart, Dad's favorite dessert, while Aunt Patricia regaled everyone with stories of beach mishaps from our childhood. Diana joined us moments later, her composure restored, but a new alertness in her observation. Of me? She participated in the conversation with her usual charm, but I noticed her attention repeatedly returning to me throughout the evening, assessing, recalculating. As the gathering wound down around 10, Diana made a point of announcing her plans for the following day. Meetings in town with potential development partners, calls with Westridge's executive team to begin the transition process, lunch with a prominent real estate journalist who was eager to cover Westridge's new chapter. It was another performance, designed to reinforce her claim on the company while subtly pressuring me to accept the situation as inevitable. The more public commitments she made based on her supposed inheritance, the more difficult it would theoretically become for me to challenge her narrative without creating embarrassing business repercussions. "Don't let us keep you from your rest then," Mom said diplomatically. "Tomorrow sounds quite demanding." As the family dispersed for the night, Diana caught my arm once more. "Emma, I meant what I said about finding a consulting role for you. Despite our differences, you do know the operational side of Westridge intimately. I'd value your expertise during this transition." The offer was intended to sound generous while actually being deeply insulting, offering me a subordinate position in the company where I had served as de facto operational head for years. "That's thoughtful," I replied with perfect politeness. "But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The reading is only 5 days away. Plenty of time for clarity on all fronts." Her smile remained fixed, but I saw calculation in her eyes. "Of course, though I do hope you're not planning anything dramatic. For Mom's sake, if nothing else." The invocation of our mother's feelings was another tactical choice, attempting to use family harmony as leverage to prevent me from challenging her fraudulent claim. "I'm planning nothing beyond ensuring Dad's true wishes are honored," I said simply. "Good night, Diana." Back in our suite, Thomas waited until the door was firmly closed before speaking. "She's getting nervous. Your calm is rattling her. She expected me to fall apart or lash out ineffectively," I agreed, slipping off my shoes. Either reaction would have reinforced her narrative that I'm too emotional for leadership. "What happened with Harrison today?" he asked, sitting on the far edge of the bed. "You haven't had a chance to fill me in completely." I explained the details of my conversation with our family attorney. The confirmation that the amendment existed but under highly suspicious circumstances, the unfamiliar witnesses, Harrison's absence from the signing process, and his personal assessment that Dad would never have made such a change, especially not on his worst chemotherapy day. "So the document exists, but is almost certainly fraudulent or coerced," Thomas summarized. "And she doesn't know you have video evidence directly contradicting it." "Exactly. Harrison suggested I might consider approaching Diana privately before the reading, giving her a chance to withdraw her claim rather than facing public exposure." Thomas considered this thoughtfully. "That's surprisingly generous given what she's attempting to do." "It's not about generosity," I clarified. "It's about what would best serve Westridge and honor Dad's legacy." A public confrontation followed. By potential litigation would damage the company, regardless of who eventually prevailed. "So, what's your plan?" Thomas asked, knowing me well enough to recognize I had been formulating one throughout the evening. "Strategic patience," I replied. "Diana believes she's won completely. She's already making public commitments based on her supposed new authority. The more entrenched she becomes in this false narrative, the more difficult it will be for her to retreat gracefully when confronted with evidence of its fraudulence." "You're giving her enough rope to thoroughly entangle herself," Thomas observed. "I'm giving her opportunities to recognize the unsustainability of her position," I corrected, gently. "The deeper she commits to this deception, the more damaging the eventual exposure will be, not just legally, but reputationally. If I confront her too early, she'll have time to construct countermeasures or alternative narratives." "So when do you plan to approach her?" "The day before the reading," I decided. "By then, she'll have 5 more days of public commitments and statements based on her fraudulent claim. I'll show her the video recording privately and offer her one opportunity to withdraw the amendment voluntarily before it's exposed publicly." Thomas nodded slowly. "And if she refuses? Then I'll be prepared to present the evidence at the reading itself," I said. "But I want to give her one chance to choose a better path, not for her sake, but for Dad's." He always believed in allowing people the opportunity to correct their mistakes before facing public consequences. This approach wasn't about vindication or revenge, but about protection. Protecting Dad's true legacy, protecting Westridge from leadership founded on deception, and even, in a way, protecting Diana from the full consequences of her actions if she was willing to step back from the precipice she had created. The next 3 days unfolded according to predictable patterns. Diana maintained a whirlwind of activity, each day venturing into town for meetings with business contacts, returning with announcements about partnerships she was exploring and changes she was considering for Westridge's direction. She made a point of conducting these conversations openly, ensuring the entire family was aware of her planning. I maintained my calm observation, neither challenging her premature planning nor engaging with her occasional offers to include me in subordinate advisory roles. My apparent acceptance of the situation clearly unnerved her, though she tried to interpret it as resignation to my diminished position. On the 4th day, Diana escalated her strategy. She arranged for a local business reporter to conduct an informal interview at the beach house, ostensibly about Westridge's community involvement, but clearly intended to publicly cement her position as the company's new leader before the official reading of the will. "I hope you don't mind," she announced at breakfast with feigned casualness. "Timothy Reynolds from the Business Journal is stopping by this afternoon. He's doing a feature on family business succession, and I thought Westridge would make an excellent case study." The calculated nature of this move was evident. Once her leadership was reported in business publications, challenging it would become more complicated and potentially embarrassing for the company. It was a preemptive effort to create external validation for her fraudulent claim. "How interesting," I replied mildly. I wasn't aware the succession details had been publicly announced yet, given that the official reading is still 2 days away. A flash of irritation crossed her features before her pleasant expression returned. "Well, the general framework is certainly established. The specifics can be clarified after the reading, of course." "Of course," I agreed. "I assume Mr. Reynolds will want to speak with Mom as well, and perhaps Aunt Patricia, given her long history with the company." This suggestion clearly wasn't part of Diana's plan. She had undoubtedly arranged for a controlled interview focused exclusively on her vision for Westridge's future, not a broader family perspective on its history and values. "I'm not sure that's necessary for this particular piece," she hedged. "It's primarily focused on future direction rather than historical context." "But surely Westridge's future is built upon its historical foundation," I countered reasonably. "Dad always emphasized that understanding our company's evolution was essential to guiding its continued growth. I believe his exact words were, 'You can't chart a meaningful course forward without honoring the journey that brought you here.'" Diana's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. My continued invocation of Dad's actual business philosophy was clearly frustrating her attempts to rewrite his legacy according to her preferences. "Well, we'll see what Mr. Reynolds is interested in covering," she said, rising from the table. "I have calls to make before he arrives. Excuse me." As she left, Mom gave me an approving glance. Without direct confrontation, I had subtly challenged Diana's attempt to publicly solidify her fraudulent claim before the official reading. "I believe I'll make myself available for this interview," Mom commented. "James would certainly want the family's perspective represented accurately." "I think that's an excellent idea," I agreed. When Timothy Reynolds arrived at 2 that afternoon, he found not just Diana waiting to greet him, but my mother, Aunt Patricia, and me. His expression registered momentary confusion. Clearly, Diana had described a very different interview scenario when arranging his visit. "Mr. Reynolds," Diana recovered smoothly, "how wonderful to meet you in person. I see you'll have the opportunity to speak with several family members today. What a fortunate coincidence that everyone was available." The subtle emphasis on coincidence conveyed her awareness that her plans had been deliberately adjusted, but she maintained her composed facade. The interview that followed was not what Diana had envisioned. Instead of focusing exclusively on her vision for Westridge's future, the conversation repeatedly returned to its founding principles and historical development. Mom shared insights about Dad's business philosophy that directly contradicted several directions Diana had been proposing. Aunt Patricia offered perspectives on the company's community commitments that challenged Diana's foundation concept. I contributed operational context that highlighted the success of our relationship-based management approach. Throughout this, Diana maintained her practiced poise, but I could see tension building in her posture and expressions. When Reynolds finally turned to the specific question of succession, Diana began her carefully prepared narrative about Dad's decision to unify leadership under her direction. James and I had extensive discussions during his illness about Westridge's future, she explained smoothly. He came to believe that divided leadership would create unnecessary complications, and ultimately decided to consolidate direction under my guidance to ensure clarity of vision moving forward. Before Reynolds could simply accept this characterization, Mom interjected gently, "Of course, the official details of James's succession plans will be formally presented at the reading of his will later this week. Until then, any discussion of specific arrangements remains somewhat preliminary." It was diplomatically phrased, but effectively undermined Diana's attempt to present her version as established fact. Reynolds made note of this qualification, his journalistic instincts clearly detecting the undercurrents beneath the polite conversation. "So, the final succession details haven't been officially announced yet?" he clarified, glancing between Diana and Mom. "The formal reading is scheduled." "For Friday," I confirmed before Diana could respond. "As a family, we believe in honoring proper legal processes before making definitive public statements about succession specifics." Diana's smile remained fixed, but her knuckles whitened slightly around her water glass. "Of course, while certain technical details await formal pronouncement, the general direction was clearly established in my conversations with Dad before his passing. I look forward to covering the official announcement after Friday's reading," Reynolds said diplomatically, clearly sensing the tension beneath the surface. "Perhaps we could schedule a follow-up interview once those details are formally established." This suggestion effectively postponed any definitive reporting until after the actual reading, precisely what Diana had been attempting to preempt with this interview. "That would be ideal," I agreed before Diana could object. "Westridge has always valued accurate and complete information in all its communications. It's a founding principle my father emphasized throughout his leadership." The message beneath my polite response was clear to everyone present. Premature announcements about succession would not be considered authoritative until formally confirmed through proper legal channels. When Reynolds departed an hour later, Diana's carefully constructed interview opportunity had yielded none of the public validation she had sought. Instead of a story announcing her leadership before the official reading, Reynolds would now wait for Friday's formal proceedings before publishing anything definitive. "That was quite unnecessary," Diana said tightly once we were alone, her practiced charm temporarily abandoned. "You've potentially created confusion about Westridge's leadership at a critical transition point. I've simply ensured that public announcements will accurately reflect legal realities," I replied calmly. "Dad would have expected nothing less from either of us." "The amendment is legally executed," she countered, a defensive edge entering her voice. "You're creating complications for no purpose other than—" "What? Spite? Jealousy?" "I'm honoring proper process," I corrected, "as we'll all do at Friday's reading." Diana studied me with growing wariness. My continued composure and references to the upcoming reading were clearly unsettling her confidence in her manufactured narrative. "You seem to be laboring under some misapprehension about Friday's outcome," she said finally. "I've seen the amendment, Emma. It's definitive and binding." "Then you have nothing to worry about," I replied simply. "Let's continue this conversation tomorrow. I believe we both have things to prepare." As I walked away, I could feel her, gaze following me, calculating, reassessing. For the first time, doubt had visibly entered her confidence. The interview that was supposed to publicly cement her fraudulent claim had instead reinforced the importance of waiting for official confirmation. Tomorrow would bring our private conversation, her one opportunity to withdraw her deception before facing public exposure. The strategic patience I had maintained throughout this challenging week was about to yield its critical moment of truth. Morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of flawless spring day that made the beach house shine like a jewel set against the coastline. It seemed almost inappropriate for the conversation that lay ahead, nature's perfection contrasting sharply with the human complications I was preparing to address. I had awakened early, reviewing my approach one final time. Today marked precisely 1 week since Diana's announcement and 1 day before the official reading of our father's will. The timing was deliberate, late enough that Diana had thoroughly committed to her fabricated narrative through multiple public statements and preliminary business arrangements, but early enough to give her a chance to withdraw her fraudulent claim before facing official exposure. Thomas and I had discussed the approach extensively the night before. "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" he had asked as we prepared for bed. "I could be there for support." "I appreciate that," I'd told him, "but this needs to be just between Diana and me. Having anyone else present would make it feel like an ambush rather than an opportunity." "An opportunity she doesn't deserve," he had noted, his protective instincts evident. "Maybe not," I'd acknowledged, "but this isn't about what Diana deserves. It's about what Dad would have wanted, what Westridge needs, and ultimately, what kind of person I choose to be regardless of her actions." Now, as I prepared for the conversation, I focused on maintaining that perspective. This confrontation wasn't about vengeance or even vindication, but about truth and protection. Protecting our father's actual intentions, protecting the company he had built, and even, in a way, protecting Diana from the full consequences of her deception if she chose to step back from it. I found her alone on the veranda shortly after breakfast, reviewing documents spread across the table. She had maintained her practice of rising early and working through preliminary plans for her company, making calls to executives and sending directive emails despite having no official authority yet. The performance continued even when no audience was present, a testament to how thoroughly she had committed to her fabricated reality. "Diana," I said, approaching with deliberate calm, "do you have some time to talk privately? There's something important we should discuss before tomorrow's reading." She glanced up, a flicker of wariness crossing her features before her composed expression returned. "Of course, though I'm not sure what requires discussion before the official proceedings." "I think you'll understand once we begin," I replied, taking the seat across from her. "Perhaps we should move somewhere more private than the veranda. The study, perhaps." Dad's study in the beach house had always been a space of consequence, the place where important family decisions were discussed, where business strategies were developed during vacations, where he had taught us both the principles that had guided Westridge's growth. It seemed fitting for this conversation. Diana hesitated momentarily, then nodded. "Very well." She gathered her documents methodically, using the routine to regain her composure. Whatever she might have expected from me this past week, emotional outbursts, ineffective protests, perhaps even tearful begging, might continued. Calm determination clearly unnerved her more than any reaction she had anticipated. The study remained exactly as Dad had left it during our last family vacation before his diagnosis. Bookshelves filled with business volumes and family photos, the substantial oak desk positioned to capture both ocean views and morning light, comfortable leather chairs arranged for conversation rather than confrontation. Mom had deliberately maintained it as a memorial of sorts, refusing to update or rearrange anything after his passing. Diana settled into one of the chairs, arranging her expression into polite attention, tinged with the faintest suggestion of condescension. the look of someone prepared to humor an unreasonable request before dismissing it. "What's on your mind?" "Emma?" she asked, her tone carefully balanced between sisterly concern and executive efficiency. Rather than immediately answering, I retrieved my laptop from the desk where I had placed it earlier, opening it and positioning it on the small table between us. Diana watched with growing curiosity, her practiced composure momentarily giving way to genuine puzzlement. "Before we begin," I said calmly, "I want to be clear about my intentions for this conversation. I'm not here to argue, accuse, or demand. I'm here to provide you with information that will significantly impact tomorrow's proceedings, and to offer you one opportunity to adjust your course before that information becomes public." Her expression shifted subtly, wariness replacing condescension, calculation replacing certainty. "That sounds unnecessarily dramatic. What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything yet," I replied. "First, I'd like you to watch something." I turned the laptop toward her and pressed play on the video file I had queued up. Dad's face appeared on screen, noticeably thinner than his healthy self, but with clear eyes and steady voice. The timestamp in the corner showed March 14th, 3 days before the date on Diana's supposed amendment. Diana's body tensed visibly as she recognized both the date and the implications of a recorded conversation. Before she could object or question the recording's legitimacy, Dad's voice filled the room. "I want to be absolutely clear about my intentions for Westridge after I'm gone," he began, his voice steady despite the physical toll of his treatments. "Emma has suggested recording this conversation so there can be no confusion later, and given the complexity of family businesses, I think that's wise." On screen, the camera angle widened slightly to show that Thomas was also present, serving as a witness to the conversation. My estate plan, which Harrison Abernathy has prepared according to my explicit instructions, divides ownership of Westridge properties equally between my daughters, Emma and Diana, Dad continued. This equal division reflects my belief that both have contributed to the company's success in their own ways, and both bring necessary skills to its future leadership. Diana's face had gone completely still, her eyes fixed on the screen with an intensity that suggested she was rapidly calculating the implications of what she was witnessing. "The operational structure," Dad went on, "will formalize the natural division of responsibilities that has developed over the years. Emma will serve as Chief Executive Officer, managing day-to-day operations, financial oversight, and strategic implementation, areas where she has demonstrated exceptional capability throughout her 15 years with the company." He paused to take a sip of water, the slight tremor in his hand the only visible evidence of his illness. "Diana will serve as chairperson of the board, focusing on client relationships, public representation, and community engagement, leveraging her networking abilities and public presence, which have contributed significantly to Westridge's reputation." As the recording continued, Dad outlined specific provisions to ensure balanced authority, prevent either sister from forcing the other out, and establish clear succession paths for future generations. He referenced discussions with Harrison about these provisions, confirmed they were already reflected in completed documents, and stated unequivocally that any changes would occur only after consulting both daughters together. Throughout this detailed explanation, Diana remained unnaturally still, her breathing shallow, her expression locked in rigid control. When Dad mentioned specific dates of document executions and meetings with Harrison, I saw her fingers tighten almost imperceptibly around the armrest of her chair. The recording concluded with Dad looking directly at the camera. "I hope these arrangements honor both the contributions my daughters have made to Westridge and the distinct capabilities they bring to its future. My greatest wish is that they continue working together, balancing each other's strengths and compensating for each other's limitations, just as they've done, sometimes without even realizing it, throughout their lives." When the video ended, silence filled the study. I closed the laptop gently, allowing the moment to settle between us. Diana remained motionless for several seconds longer than natural, her mind visibly racing behind eyes that had narrowed to analytical focus. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a careful neutrality that belied the tension evident in her posture. "An interesting recording," she said, working to maintain her composure. "Though clearly preliminary discussions can evolve over time, as evidenced by the amendment executed 3 days later." Her immediate pivot to the supposedly legitimate amendment rather than outright denial of the recording's authenticity was telling. She was already formulating a narrative that could accommodate both the video evidence and her fraudulent document. "About that amendment," I replied calmly. "I've spoken with Harrison Abernathy. He confirms that Dad executed no such document. In his presence, despite having been present for every other significant legal document Dad signed for over 40 years. He also confirms that on March 17th, the date of the supposed amendment, Dad was undergoing his 3rd chemotherapy treatment, which I personally drove him to and from. He was severely nauseated, physically weakened, and according to Harrison, who visited him that evening, barely able to sign a get-well card. His hands were shaking so badly from the treatment." Diana's expression remained carefully controlled, but a muscle twitched at her jaw, the tell she had possessed since childhood, when caught in a lie but still formulating a defense. "Harrison's memory may be compromised by his obvious affection for you," she countered smoothly. "The amendment exists, with Dad's signature and proper witnesses. Whatever conversations occurred before or after doesn't change its legal validity." "Interesting that you mention witnesses," I continued, maintaining the same calm tone. "Claudia, Winters and Thomas Bennett, individuals neither Harrison nor any family member has ever heard of, and a notary from a service Dad never used for any previous document. All this on a day when he was physically incapable of reviewing complex legal changes due to chemotherapy side effects." I paused, allowing these facts to settle between us. "Diana, I'm not here to speculate about exactly how you obtained a document with Dad's signature on his worst treatment day, or who these mysterious witnesses might be. I'm here to offer you one opportunity to withdraw that amendment before tomorrow's reading, when this video and these inconsistencies will otherwise become part of the official record." For the first time since her announcement a week ago, Diana's carefully constructed facade showed significant cracks. Color drained from her face, leaving her complexion almost gray against the vibrant blues of the ocean visible through the study windows behind her. "You're threatening me," she said, her voice unnaturally flat. "I'm offering you an alternative," I corrected gently. "An opportunity to withdraw a document that cannot withstand scrutiny before its fraudulence is publicly exposed. An opportunity to return to the equal partnership Dad actually intended, which still provides you with significant wealth, position, and authority. And if I refuse this generous offer?" The sarcasm in her tone couldn't quite mask the underlying uncertainty that had crept into her voice. "Then tomorrow I'll present this recording to Harrison and everyone present at the reading," I said simply. "Harrison will likely have no choice but to refer the matter for legal investigation, given the evidence suggesting either coercion of a medically compromised individual or outright fraud. Either scenario would trigger not just civil proceedings regarding the estate, but potentially criminal investigation depending on how the document and signatures were obtained." The blunt assessment hung in the air between us. I had deliberately avoided accusatory language, presenting the potential consequences as natural outcomes rather than vindictive threats. This wasn't about punishing Diana, but about clarifying the unsustainability of her position. Diana rose abruptly, moving to the window where she stood with her back to me, staring out at the ocean. The rigid set of her shoulders betrayed the tension coursing through her despite her attempt to physically remove herself from the confrontation. "You have no idea what it's been like," she said finally, her voice carrying a bitter edge I had rarely heard from her. "Standing in your shadow at Westridge for years, watching Dad beam with pride over your operational innovations while treating my contributions as decorative accessories to real business. Being introduced as Diana, our public relations specialist, while you were Emma, our operational genius. The raw resentment in her voice was startling after years of her carefully maintained public confidence. This wasn't the calculated Diana who had orchestrated board presentations and client meetings with flawless polish, but something closer to the sibling rivalry of our childhood, unfiltered and emotional. "Is that how you see what happened?" I asked quietly. Because, from my perspective, Dad celebrated your networking abilities constantly. He attributed major client acquisitions to your relationship-building skills. He featured you in company publications and industry events specifically because you excelled at representing Westridge publicly in ways I never could. Token acknowledgments, she dismissed without turning around. Meanwhile, you were the one he mentored personally on business strategy. You were the one he took to industry conferences to introduce to his business contemporaries. You were the one he prepared for leadership while I was relegated to glorified event planning. The distortion in her perspective was genuinely shocking. For years, I had actually envied the easy rapport Diana seemed to share with Dad at public functions. The natural way they worked a room together, the pride he took in introducing her to business associates. Meanwhile, I had spent countless hours in operational meetings that felt more like rigorous examinations than mentorship, with Dad challenging every assumption and questioning every projection until my strategies were airtight. "Diana," I said carefully, "Dad pushed me relentlessly on operations because that was my area of responsibility. He celebrated your social intelligence and relationship building because those were your strengths. Neither approach indicated preference. They reflected his different teaching styles for different business functions." She turned from the window, her expression hardening. "Save the revisionist history, Emma. We both know who the favorite was. This amendment simply corrected a lifelong imbalance." The fact that she was essentially admitting to the amendment's fraudulent nature while simultaneously justifying it revealed how thoroughly she had rationalized her actions as righteous correction rather than deception. "Let's set aside questions of favoritism," I suggested, refusing to be drawn into that unresolvable debate. "The fact remains that Dad explicitly recorded his actual intentions just days before this supposed amendment. His clearly stated plan was equal ownership with balanced but distinct leadership roles reflecting our different capabilities. Whatever perceptions or resentments existed in our relationship with him, that was his authentic, considered decision for Westridge's future." Diana returned to her seat, her movements deliberately measured as she regained her composure. "And now you have me at a disadvantage. Congratulations. What exactly are you proposing as this alternative you're so generously offering?" "Before tomorrow's reading, you inform Harrison that you've reconsidered and wish to withdraw the amendment," I explained. "You attribute this change of heart to further reflection on Dad's known wishes and family harmony. Harrison handles the procedural aspects. The original estate plan proceeds as Dad intended, and no one beyond the three of us ever needs to know about this recording or the questions surrounding the amendment's creation. And we simply proceed, as if none of this happened?" Her tone conveyed profound skepticism. "You expect me to believe you'd be willing to work alongside me after this?" "I expect us both to honor Dad's actual intentions for Westridge," I replied evenly. "That means equal ownership and complementary leadership roles. You as chairperson managing external relationships, me as CEO managing operations. Exactly as he outlined and exactly as our natural capabilities would suggest." "And you'd trust me in that role? After what you're clearly convinced was a deceptive act?" "Trust can be rebuilt through consistent actions," I said. Dad believed in second chances and in people's capacity to learn from mistakes. I'm trying to approach this situation with the same philosophy. Diana studied me with narrowed eyes, trying to detect ulterior motives or hidden traps in my offer. Finding none, she leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive for the first time in our conversation. "And if I were to accept this alternative," she said finally, "what assurance do I have that this recording won't mysteriously surface later when some disagreement inevitably arises between us?" "The same assurance I have that you won't attempt something similar again," I replied candidly. "None, except our mutual commitment to move forward differently. Trust has to start somewhere, Diana. It can begin with how we resolve this situation." She fell silent again, her gaze turning back toward the ocean. For several minutes, neither of us spoke, the only sound in the study coming from the distant waves and occasional seabird calls. "I need time to consider this," she said eventually. "You have until 6 this evening," I replied, my tone gentle but firm. "Harrison needs time to prepare the appropriate documentation if you choose to withdraw the amendment. After that, events will proceed according to the evidence available." Diana nodded once, her expression unreadable. "I'll let you know my decision." As I rose to leave, she remained seated, staring out at the ocean with the intensity of someone calculating complex variables. At the door, I paused briefly. "Diana," I said quietly, "whatever you decide, I want you to know that I never saw our relationship at Westridge as a competition. I always believed we complemented each other in exactly the way Dad described in that recording. I still believe that's possible, if we both choose it." She didn't respond or turn to acknowledge my words, but a subtle shift in her posture suggested she had heard them. Whether they would influence her decision remained to be seen. The hours that followed were among the strangest of my life. The family continued its vacation activities. Mom and Aunt Patricia planned a special dinner for our last night at the beach house. Thomas and Michael discussed taking the small sailboat out for an afternoon. Conversation flowed around ordinary topics, while Diana and I moved through these scenes with the knowledge that everything might change by evening. Diana spent most of the day alone, sometimes walking on the beach, sometimes working in her room, occasionally joining family activities with a distracted politeness that others attributed to pre-reading nervousness. I maintained my regular interactions, while privately wondering which path she would choose: genuine partnership as Dad had intended, or continued commitment to her fraudulent claim despite the evidence that would now certainly expose it. At precisely 6 o'clock, as the family gathered on the veranda for pre-dinner drinks, Diana approached me quietly. "I need to make a call to Harrison," she said, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "About withdrawing the amendment." Relief washed through me, though I kept my expression neutral. "His office closes at 6:30. You should call now." She nodded once, then walked inside without further explanation to the others. Through the glass doors, I could see her dial her phone and begin speaking, her posture rigid but resolved. Thomas caught my eye from across the veranda, raising a questioning eyebrow. I gave him a subtle nod, confirming what he had already guessed. Diana had chosen the path of correction rather than confrontation. When she returned 15 minutes later, her expression was composed but subdued. She accepted a glass of wine from Mom and rejoined the family conversation with practiced ease, though I noticed she avoided direct interaction with me for the remainder of the evening. It wasn't until after dinner, as the family drifted toward various evening activities, that she found a private moment to speak with me again. "It's done," she said simply. "Harrison will prepare the necessary documentation tonight. The original estate plan will proceed as written tomorrow." "Thank you," I replied, meaning it sincerely. Her decision, whatever motivations had ultimately driven it, had spared the family a painful public confrontation and protected Westridge from potentially damaging legal proceedings. Diana's expression remained carefully neutral. "Don't thank me yet. We still have to figure out how to work together after this. One day at a time," I suggested, "starting with honoring Dad's actual wishes tomorrow." She nodded once, then added with unexpected candor, I still believe I deserved more recognition than I received all these years. That hasn't changed. Then perhaps that's where we start rebuilding, I offered, by ensuring both our contributions are properly valued moving forward, equal partners with different strengths, just as Dad envisioned. Diana didn't reply immediately, studying me with an expression that suggested she was seeing something new in our dynamic. Not victory or defeat, but the possibility of a more balanced relationship than we had managed to create in the past. "We'll see," she said finally, neither accepting nor rejecting the possibility outright. It wasn't reconciliation or even full resolution, but it was a beginning, a step away from deception and toward the partnership our father had envisioned for Westridge's future. The inheritance Diana had attempted to claim exclusively would now be shared as intended, not because of public exposure or legal mandate, but because she had ultimately chosen correction when presented with the opportunity. As I watched her walk away, I realized that the true inheritance I had fought to protect wasn't just my share of Westridge properties, but the values that had built it: integrity, fairness, and the belief that even serious mistakes could be corrected if given the proper opportunity. In offering Diana that chance rather than pursuing immediate vindication, I had honored not just my father's business intentions, but the principles that had guided his life. Tomorrow's reading would proceed according to his authentic wishes, and the partnership he had envisioned would have its opportunity to develop, not in the absence of past conflicts, but with a clearer understanding of the choices that could either strengthen or undermine it moving forward. The beach house fell quiet as evening deepened into night. Through the open windows of our suite, Thomas and I could hear the rhythmic crashing of waves against the shore, the same constant sound that had formed the backdrop of our childhood vacations, our father's business discussions, and now this pivotal moment in our family's journey. "Do you think she'll actually be able to work with you after this?" Thomas asked as we prepared for bed. "Or is she just buying time until she can try something else?" "I don't know," I admitted. But Dad believed she could be a valuable partner if she channeled her ambition constructively. He saw something in her that made him maintain that belief despite their differences. "I'm trying to honor that perspective by giving this partnership a genuine chance." "Your father would be proud of how you handled this," Thomas said quietly. "Not just protecting his wishes for the company, but offering Diana a path to correction rather than just exposure." As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself thinking not about tomorrow's reading or even the partnership that would follow, but about the recording that had ultimately protected Dad's true legacy. "Memory gets fuzzy around these things after someone's gone," he had said when requesting it. "When the time comes, I want there to be no question about what I intended." His foresight had created the evidence that ultimately protected his wishes, but it was the values he had instilled, the belief in second chances, in resolution over retribution, in truth with compassion, that had guided how that evidence was used. The true inheritance wasn't contained in legal documents or ownership shares. It lived in the principles that would continue guiding Westridge's future, now secured by a confrontation that had created opportunity for correction rather than merely exposing deception. The formal reading of James Westridge's will took place in Harrison Abernathy's office rather than the beach house, a deliberate choice to separate legal proceedings from family space. The Victorian building's conference room maintained its timeless dignity, with morning light filtering through tall windows and illuminating the polished oak table where our family gathered. Mom sat at one end, her posture straight, and her expression serene despite the emotional weight of the occasion. Aunt Patricia occupied the chair to her right, with Michael beside her. Thomas and I sat across from them, leaving the chair at the opposite end from Mom conspicuously empty until Diana arrived. She entered precisely at the scheduled time, dressed in a tailored navy suit that projected professional confidence. If anyone had expected visible signs of yesterday's confrontation and subsequent decision, they would have been disappointed. Diana's composure was flawless as she greeted everyone appropriately and took her seat. Harrison arrived moments later, carrying a leather portfolio containing the documents that would formalize our father's wishes for his estate. At 78, he moved with the deliberate care of someone who had learned that precision matters, more than speed, particularly in legal matters. "Good morning," he began, settling at the head of the table between Mom and Diana. "Today we gather to formalize James Westridge's final wishes regarding his estate. As you know, James approached this process with the same thoughtful consideration he brought to all significant decisions." His gaze moved briefly between Diana and me, a subtle acknowledgement of yesterday's developments that went unnoticed by the others. "Before we proceed, I should note that there was a proposed amendment to the trust dated March 17th that has subsequently been withdrawn. The estate will be distributed according to the original trust documents as James intended." This announcement created a ripple of subtle reactions around the table. Michael glanced sharply at Diana, his legal mind clearly making connections with her earlier announcement at the beach house. Aunt Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly, moving between Diana and me with sudden comprehension. Mom simply nodded once, as if Harrison had merely confirmed what she had always known would happen. Diana maintained her composed expression, though I noticed her hands briefly tighten around the leather portfolio she had brought with her. "The distribution of James's estate reflects his lifelong commitments to family, business, and community," Harrison continued smoothly. "I'll summarize the key provisions before providing each of you with copies of the complete documents." The reading proceeded methodically. Personal items and family heirlooms were distributed with thoughtful consideration of emotional connections. Mom, receiving the art collection they had built together over 48 years of marriage, Aunt Patricia inheriting the historical family photographs she had always treasured, Michael receiving Dad's collection of first-edition business books that had inspired conversations during his legal education. Then Harrison turned to the central matter that had created such tension over the past week. "Regarding Westridge properties," he stated, his tone shifting to reflect the significance of this portion. "James established a carefully balanced succession plan designed to honor different contributions while ensuring continuity of leadership." He opened a specific document from his portfolio. "Ownership of Westridge properties is divided equally between Emma and Diana Westridge, with each receiving 50% of all shares and equal representation on the company's board of directors." The official confirmation of what the video recording had detailed brought a subtle sense of rightness to the room, the correction of what had nearly become a profound injustice. "Operational leadership," Harrison continued, "is structured to leverage specific capabilities. Emma Westridge will serve as Chief Executive Officer, with primary responsibility for operational management, financial oversight, and strategic implementation. Diana Westridge will serve as Chairperson of the Board, with primary responsibility for client relationships, public representation, and community engagement." As Harrison detailed the specific provisions ensuring balanced authority and preventing either sister from forcing the other out, I watched Diana carefully. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but something in her posture had shifted, a slight relaxation suggesting acceptance rather than resistance to these terms. The reading concluded with Dad's established charitable provisions, including educational scholarships for first-generation college students and community development funds for neighborhoods where Westridge maintained properties. These reflected his belief that business success created community responsibilities, a philosophy he had emphasized throughout his leadership. "James included a personal letter to be read at this gathering," Harrison said, removing a sealed envelope from his portfolio. "He asked that I share it with all of you together." He opened the envelope carefully and unfolded several pages of Dad's distinctive handwriting. Despite his declining health, he had insisted on writing this final communication personally rather than dictating it, a testament to the importance he placed on these last words to his family. "To my beloved family," Harrison began reading, If you're hearing these words, I've completed my journey, and you're continuing yours. This gives me both sadness and peace. Sadness at our separation, peace in knowing that what matters most continues through each of you. Harrison's voice, normally so precisely controlled in legal proceedings, carried a hint of emotion as he read our father's personal reflections on his life's blessings. His marriage to Eleanor, whose partnership made everything else possible, his pride in watching my daughters develop into capable women with complementary strengths, his appreciation for Patricia's unwavering support through every challenge, and his hope for Michael, who carries our family's commitment to integrity into a new generation. Then came the portion that seemed written with almost prophetic understanding of our current circumstances. To my daughters, Emma and Diana, your different approaches to business and life have sometimes created tension between you, but they represent exactly the balance Westridge needs moving forward. Emma, your analytical mind and operational excellence provide the foundation for sustainable growth. Diana, your relationship building and public presence create opportunities that numbers alone cannot generate. Neither of you is complete without the other's strengths. I've structured Westridge's future leadership to reflect this reality, not to constrain either of you, but to create the partnership that will allow both of you to achieve more together than either could alone. The greatest test of leadership isn't how you wield authority when everything aligns with your preferences, but how you navigate challenges when perspectives differ. There will be disagreements. That's inevitable with strong, capable individuals. What determines successful partnership isn't the absence of conflict, but how you resolve it when it occurs. Trust each other's judgment in your respective areas of expertise. Consult before making decisions that affect both domains. Remember that different approaches can lead to the same destination, and when conflict arises, as it surely will, seek resolution that honors both perspectives rather than victory for either. This balanced leadership isn't a compromise, but an optimization. Recognizing that Westridge's continued success requires both operational excellence and relationship brilliance, both analytical precision and interpersonal intelligence. Together, you represent all these qualities. Separately, each of you would have only part of what the company needs. My deepest wish is that you view this structure not as a limitation, but as an opportunity to support each other's strengths, to compensate for each other's limitations, and to build something greater together than either could create alone. Harrison paused briefly before continuing with the letter's conclusion, which addressed the entire family with final expressions of love and gratitude. When he finished reading, a profound silence filled the room, not the tense silence of unresolved conflict, but the reflective quiet of meaningful truths being absorbed. Mom was the first to speak. James always did understand people better than they understood themselves, she said softly, especially his daughters. Diana and I exchanged glances across the table, the first direct acknowledgement between us since her decision yesterday. Something shifted in that moment. Not forgiveness exactly, nor immediate trust, but perhaps recognition that we both had choices to make about how we would honor these final instructions from our father. There are copies of all documents for each of you, Harrison said, returning to his professional role as he distributed folders around the table. Please review them at your convenience and contact me with any questions about implementation or specific provisions. The formal reading concluded with subdued conversation and expressions of gratitude to Harrison for his guidance through the process. As the family prepared to leave, Diana approached me directly for the first time that morning. We should discuss transition details, she said, her tone businesslike but not adversarial. Perhaps lunch tomorrow before everyone departs? I think that would be productive, I agreed, recognizing the olive branch contained within her practical suggestion. This wasn't emotional reconciliation. That would require more time and demonstrated trustworthiness from both sides. But it was a professional willingness to move forward according to Dad's intended structure. As we left Harrison's office, Mom linked her arm through mine while Diana walked slightly ahead with Aunt Patricia. "Something significant happened yesterday between you two," Mom observed quietly. "Something that changed the trajectory before today's reading." It wasn't a question, but an observation from someone who had spent decades watching the subtle dynamics between her daughters. "Let's just say Diana made a different choice than she initially intended," I replied, respecting the privacy of our confrontation while acknowledging its reality. One that ultimately aligned with Dad's actual wishes. Mom nodded thoughtfully. "Growth rarely comes from comfort, Emma. Sometimes people need to reach the edge of serious consequences before recognizing better paths. What matters now isn't how you both arrived at this point, but where you go from here." Her insight, as always, went straight to the heart of the situation. The video evidence had created the opportunity for correction, but only Diana's decision to withdraw the fraudulent amendment had made restoration possible. Now we both faced choices about how to implement the partnership Dad had envisioned. Choices that would define not just Westridge's future, but our relationship moving forward. The family returned to the beach house for a final lunch before departing for our respective homes. The conversation flowed more naturally than it had all week, the resolution of the inheritance question removing the underlying tension that had affected every interaction. After lunch, Diana surprised everyone by suggesting a walk on the beach to discuss transition plans for Westridge, and specifically inviting me to join her. As we made our way down the wooden steps to the shore, leaving the others on the veranda, I recognized this as a deliberate choice to create private space for necessary conversation. We walked in silence for several minutes, the rhythmic sound of waves providing background to our thoughts. Diana had exchanged her formal suit for casual clothes more appropriate to the beach setting, but her expression remained carefully composed. "I've been thinking about Dad's letter," she said finally as we reached a stretch of shore away from other visitors. Particularly the part about different approaches leading to the same destination. "That resonated with me as well," I acknowledged. "He understood our differences better than we sometimes do ourselves." Diana studied the horizon before continuing. "I still believe I deserved more recognition than I received over the years. That perception hasn't changed. It was the same statement she had made yesterday after withdrawing the amendment. But today it seemed less like justification and more like honest perspective, the beginning of a more authentic conversation than we had managed previously." "I understand that's how you experienced things," I replied carefully. "My perception was different, but that doesn't invalidate yours. Perhaps we both missed recognizing certain aspects of each other's contributions." She glanced at me with mild surprise, clearly having expected a more defensive response. "That's remarkably generous, considering recent events." "Not generous," I corrected gently. "Practical. If we're going to build the partnership Dad envisioned, we need to acknowledge different perceptions rather than arguing about whose is more accurate. Both can contain truth simultaneously." Diana processed this concept, visibly considering its implications. "So, where does that leave us practically? How do we move forward as business partners after everything that's happened?" It was the central question: how to build functional partnership from the ashes of attempted deception and near confrontation. Not just for Westridge's operations, but for the family relationships that surrounded and supported the business. I suggest we start with clearly defined roles that honor Dad's structure while providing appropriate autonomy, I offered. "You lead external relationships and public positioning as chairperson. I manage operations and implementation as CEO. We consult on decisions that affect both domains, but respect each other's expertise within our established areas." "That's essentially what the trust documents outline," Diana noted. "Because Dad understood what Westridge needs from both of us," I agreed. "The structure is sound. The question is whether we can implement it with genuine respect rather than reluctant compliance." Diana stopped walking, turning to face the ocean rather than me. "You could have exposed everything yesterday," she said quietly. Presented. The recording at the reading triggered investigations, potentially destroyed my reputation permanently. Why offer me the chance to withdraw instead? It was the question that had been underlying our interactions since yesterday's confrontation, the puzzlement of someone who had planned ruthless consolidation of power, encountering unexpected mercy instead. "Several reasons," I answered honestly. "Protecting Westridge from damaging litigation, honoring Dad's belief in resolution over retribution, but mostly because permanent division between us wasn't what he wanted for either the company or the family. He believed we could be stronger together despite our differences, maybe even because of them." "And you share that belief?" Her skepticism was evident but not dismissive, a genuine question rather than a rhetorical challenge. "I'm willing to give it the opportunity to prove itself," I replied. "Not with blind trust, but with structured partnership and clear accountability." We start from where we are now, not pretending yesterday didn't happen, but not allowing it to predetermine our future either. Diana turned from the ocean to study me directly. "That's remarkably pragmatic." "Business usually is," I observed, "especially family business. We separate personal feelings from professional decisions when necessary, find workable solutions for complex situations, and move forward with clear agreements rather than emotional reactions." For the first time since her announcement, a week ago, I saw something close to genuine respect in Diana's expression. Recognition of a maturity and strategic thinking she hadn't fully acknowledged previously. "I can work with that approach," she said finally. "Professional partnership with appropriate boundaries and clear responsibilities." It wasn't emotional reconciliation or instantaneous trust, but it was a practical foundation for working together. Exactly. The kind of structured beginning that complex situations often required. "Then that's where we start," I agreed. "We'll develop specific protocols for decision-making, communication expectations, and conflict resolution. Professional guardrails that allow the partnership to function regardless of emotional fluctuations." We resumed walking, the conversation shifting toward practical implementation details: how to announce the leadership structure to Westridge's executive team, which client relationships required immediate attention, what operational priorities needed addressing in the coming weeks. It was precisely the kind of balanced discussion Dad had envisioned. Diana identifying relationship opportunities I might have overlooked, me suggesting operational efficiencies she hadn't considered. As we turned back toward the beach house, Diana paused once more. "For what it's worth," she said with uncharacteristic hesitation, "I recognize that the amendment situation was inappropriate. Whatever justifications I created internally don't change that reality." It wasn't quite an apology, but from Diana, who had spent a lifetime avoiding acknowledgement of missteps, it represented significant recognition. The fact that she had used inappropriate rather than minimizing language suggested genuine reflection rather than merely strategic concession. "I appreciate that acknowledgement," I replied simply. "It creates better foundation for moving forward than pretending it never happened." We continued toward the house in silence, both processing the implications of this evolving dynamic. The partnership Dad had envisioned wouldn't emerge instantly from one conversation, but the tentative framework had been established. Professional respect as the foundation for potential trust, clear structures creating space for collaborative possibilities. The following weeks would test this framework as we implemented Westridge's new leadership structure. Diana and I met daily during the transition period, establishing explicit protocols for decision-making, communication standards, and conflict resolution procedures. These weren't emotional band-aids, but professional guardrails, the kind of structured agreements that allow complex partnerships to function effectively regardless of personal history. 1 month after the reading, we gathered Westridge's executive team for a formal presentation of the new leadership structure. Diana and I had carefully crafted the announcement together, ensuring it emphasized continuity of Dad's vision while clarifying our complementary roles moving forward. The company headquarters' main conference room was filled to capacity. Department heads, regional managers, and key team leaders all gathered to understand how James Westridge's succession plan would affect their daily operations and long-term security. Diana began the presentation with her characteristic polish, honoring Dad's legacy while expressing confidence in Westridge's continued success under shared leadership. My father believed that complementary capabilities create stronger outcomes than individual talents alone, she explained. The leadership structure he established reflects that philosophy, leveraging different strengths toward common objectives. When she introduced me as Chief Executive Officer, the transition was seamless. A professional handoff that demonstrated the balanced approach we were implementing. I outlined our operational priorities and strategic direction, emphasizing continuity while acknowledging necessary adaptations to changing market conditions. The most telling moment came during the question period, when Daniel Ryerson, our longest-serving regional manager, asked directly about potential conflicts between chairperson and CEO roles. "How will decisions be made when perspectives differ?" he inquired, voicing the concern many probably shared but hesitated to express. In the past, James made final determinations when executive opinions diverged. Diana and I exchanged glances, having anticipated this exact question during our preparation. We had agreed that I would address operational queries while she handled relationship concerns, but this question straddled both domains. "That's an excellent question, Daniel," Diana responded. "We've established specific protocols for different decision categories. Operational decisions fall primarily under Emma's authority as CEO, while relationship and representation decisions fall under my authority as chairperson. For decisions affecting both domains," I continued seamlessly, "we've implemented a structured consultation process. This ensures both perspectives are thoroughly considered before reaching resolution." But what happens if you fundamentally disagree after consultation?" Daniel pressed, seeking clarity on the ultimate authority. "Then we implement our established resolution procedure," Diana explained. "We each present our position to a facilitating third party, in this case, either our COO or CFO, depending on the subject matter, who helps identify potential integration of both approaches rather than simple selection of either. The goal isn't elimination of different perspectives," I added, "but integration of complementary insights." Dad recognized that Westridge's strength comes from balancing relationship intelligence with operational excellence. Our decision protocols are designed to maintain that balance when tensions naturally arise. The thoughtful nods around the room suggested this approach had addressed the underlying concern about potential power struggles. The remainder of the meeting focused on specific initiatives and implementation timelines, with Diana and I alternating responses based on our respective domains. As the team dispersed afterward, Harrison Abernathy approached us in the corridor outside the conference room. Though technically retired from daily practice, he had attended as both family advisor and transitional counsel to Westridge. "James would have been exceedingly proud of that presentation," he said quietly, his eyes showing the emotional depth his professional demeanor typically concealed. "Not just the content, but the balanced implementation. That's precisely what he envisioned when he structured the succession plan." His validation carried particular weight given his knowledge of both the original inheritance intentions and the averted crisis surrounding Diana's withdrawn amendment. This wasn't merely professional approval, but personal recognition of the significant journey we had navigated to reach this point. "We're still developing the partnership," I acknowledged, "but the framework is proving effective so far." "Frameworks matter," Harrison observed. "They create space for relationships to evolve within appropriate boundaries." James understood that better than most. Diana, who had been speaking with a department head nearby, rejoined us as Harrison prepared to leave. "Your father once told me," he said, addressing both of us now, That his greatest hope wasn't that you would always agree, but that you would find constructive ways to benefit from your differences. Today suggests that hope is being realized. His words lingered as we returned to our respective offices to continue the day's responsibilities. The partnership Dad had envisioned wasn't built on artificial harmony, but on structured integration. Of different perspectives, exactly what we had demonstrated in the meeting. Later that afternoon, Diana stopped by my office with a proposal for a potential client relationship that intersected with several operational considerations. In the past, she might have proceeded independently with the relationship development, leaving operational implications as secondary considerations. Today, she explicitly acknowledged the overlapping domains and suggested a collaborative approach to pursuing the opportunity. This seems like exactly the kind of situation where our decision protocol would apply, she noted, referencing the consultation process we had described in the morning meeting. Your operational perspective would strengthen the proposal considerably. It was a small moment, but a significant one. Recognition of complementary capabilities rather than competitive positioning. Not emotional reconciliation, but professional respect. Not perfect trust, but structured partnership. As we reviewed the opportunity together, I realized that Dad's inheritance plan had protected more than just my position within Westridge. It had created the possibility for something he valued even more highly. A business future where different strengths could combine toward common objectives rather than compete for dominant influence. The true restoration wasn't just of ownership, rights, or leadership roles, but of balanced partnership that honored different capabilities while pursuing shared purpose. The video evidence had created the opportunity for correction. Diana's decision to withdraw the fraudulent amendment had enabled restoration, and our mutual commitment to structured implementation was now building the foundation for potential transformation. Looking across my desk at Diana as she outlined potential client benefits, I recognized that we were both receiving the inheritance Dad had actually intended, not just shares in a company, but participation in a legacy built on integrity, balance, and the recognition that different perspectives, properly integrated, create stronger outcomes than individual brilliance alone. The path forward wouldn't be without challenges. Trust damaged by deception requires consistent demonstration of trustworthiness to rebuild. Different perspectives would naturally create tensions requiring resolution. The partnership Dad envisioned would need continuous cultivation rather than one-time establishment. But the foundation had been laid, not through denial of past conflicts, but through clear acknowledgement and structured protocols for moving forward. Not through emotional shortcuts, but through professional frameworks that could accommodate the complex reality of family-business relationships. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.